Good morning, folks. Welcome to another daily devotional. This morning I want to read from Matthew chapter 19 and verses 13 and through to 15. There we read these words. Then children were brought to him, that is to Jesus, that he might lay his hands on them and pray. The disciples rebuked the people, but Jesus said, "Let the little children come to me, and do not hinder them. For to such belongs the kingdom of heaven." And he laid his hands on them and went away. The subject for our study this morning in our daily devotions is this lady. Her name is Gladys Aylward. Gladys Aylward was born in 1902. She was the daughter of Thomas and Rosina. She was from Edmonton in North London, and her family were very much a working class family. During her teenage years, she served as a domestic, in other words, as a worker to someone who owned property. She attended a gospel mission in her teens and was converted, and very soon afterwards had a real passion and desire to be a missionary. She applied to the CIM, the China Inland Mission, and was taken for 3 months prep training to see if she was sufficiently capable of learning the Chinese language and to be taken under the care of CIM. Sadly, her ability in language was somewhat limited at this stage in her life, and the 3-month period was terminated. She did, however, hear of a woman who lived in China, an English woman, who was keen to have a young woman come and help her in the work that she did. This woman was 73 years old. Her name was Jenny Lawson. Having written to Jenny and received a reply saying that she would love it if Gladys could come, but she would have to make her own way, Gladys used all her savings to buy a ticket to China. She couldn't afford the ticket that would have taken her by boat, and so she booked a ticket on the Trans-Siberian Railway. She set out on October of 1939 from London, and all that she had was her passport, her Bible, her tickets, and £2.09 to travel to the far reaches of the globe. She arrived in Vladivostok and was actually detained by the Russians. She was able to escape and to make her way to Japan. From Japan, she travelled to China, arriving in the city of Yangcheng. She began working with Jenny Lawson, trying to make the gospel known to the people. However, because they were foreigners, people really didn't listen to them. They decided one of the ways in which they might be able to get people's attention was to turn where they were living into an inn for travellers. The building used to be used as an inn, and so they refurbished it as best as they could. As men were going past in the evenings, they would have pulled their mules into the inn, given the animals fodder, fed the men, and then told them stories about Jesus from the Gospels. In this way, the message about Jesus began to spread. The traders with their mules would have moved on and recounted how they stayed in this inn and told to others the stories that they were told. The inn was called the Inn of the Eighth Happiness, and it was called that based on the 8 virtues of love, truth, gentleness, tolerance, loyalty, virtue, beauty, and devotion. They became well known for the work that they did in this inn, and indeed for the message of Jesus. People were converted, and the local leader of the province came to the inn and asked Gladys Aylward if she would be willing to become the official food inspector of the region. China had passed new laws that forbade the practice of binding the feet of young women that supposedly enabled them to walk more gracefully. They needed a female to be appointed to this post, and they asked Gladys if she would take on the responsibility, which she did. And as she went around the country, of course, she also spread the good news of the gospel. A riot broke out in the local prison, and the local Mandarin, the ruler in that region, came to her and asked her if she would intervene. Understandably, she says, "What can I do?" And he says, "Well, you keep saying that Christians aren't afraid of anything. Go in there and sort it out." And believe it or not, that's what she did. She went in and she shouted and told him that she couldn't hear what was going on, called together some of the prisoners, discovered that the riot was over food because there wasn't enough food to go around and bad conditions. And she brought about prison reform. And as a result, the prison was much more peaceful and quiet. She also had the opportunity of sharing the gospel with those who were in prison. She risked her life many times to help those who were in need. In 1938, China was invaded by Japan. And in the midst of that war, Gladys Aylward was wounded. And yet, despite the wounds that she suffered, she led over 100 orphans across the mountains to safety. And as a result of that, many of those young orphans became Christians. She returned to England, to Great Britain in 1949, when it was obvious that China was going to be overtaken by communists. She settled in Basingstoke, and she gave many talks about the work that she had been doing in China. She then tried to return to China, but was actually forbidden from doing so by the new Chinese Communist government. She eventually went back to Hong Kong, and from Hong Kong she settled in Taiwan in 1958. There she founded the Gladys Aylward Orphanage and worked in it until 1970, when on the 3rd of January of that year she died aged 67. She gave herself wholeheartedly to working with the orphans in the land of China. In 1958, a Hollywood film was made starring Ingrid Bergman as Gladys Aylward, entitled The Inn of the Sixth Happiness. Gladys Aylward was not happy with this film, as it was very inaccurate in many places, and it didn't portray the work the way it should have. Gladys Aylward was a woman who had, first of all, a love for Christ, and then had a real burden for China, and when she got to China, for the children of China. She herself adopted a couple of Chinese orphans, one called Ninepence, the other called Les. He got his name because Ninepence one day was out in the street, and she brought this young boy in and said to Gladys, "Please help him, I will take less food." And so Ninepence and Les became Gladys Aylward's adopted children. Gladys Aylward shows us what it cost to be committed to Christ. She was prepared to use every penny she had to get to China. She was prepared to travel on what was a very dangerous route to China using the Trans-Siberian Railway. She was willing to suffer for Christ, as she did during the war with Japan, and she was willing to take on responsibilities in the land that she had adopted. Brethren, people like Gladys Aylward and others that we have considered in the course of this series challenge us to ask ourselves, are we prepared to make personal sacrifices in order to serve our Saviour? Gladys Aylward was willing to surrender all for Christ. Are we willing to do the same? May God bless you as you reflect upon these things and upon how devoted we are to our Saviour. Have a good day, folks.